The wind, a raw, keening thing, tore through the narrow alleyway, whipping Emily Green's threadbare hood back from her face. Rain, cold and spiteful, lashed down, blurring the neon sign of O'Malley's grocer into a crimson smear. It plastered her thin, oversized coat to her small frame, the cheap fabric offering little solace against the November chill. Each gust felt like a physical blow, pushing her deeper into the sodden, overflowing cardboard boxes piled against the brick wall of the defunct laundromat. She wasn't just hiding from the rain. She was hiding from him. A tiny choked whimper escaped her lips, swallowed by the howl of the wind. Her fingers, numb and blue, clutched a rolled-up piece of drawing paper, her art class project. On it, a house blazed angry reds and oranges, devouring the windows, a stick-figure child trapped inside. A different house from her usual dark, crooked ones. This one was their house. The memory, sharp as shattered glass, pricked at her mama, singing her voice a warm melody against the rumble of Papa's laughter. The scent of baking cookies, the way the bedside lamp cast a soft golden halo in her room. Mama had once sung her a lullaby. "Sleep, my little star, the moon will guard your dreams afar." Now the only sound was the drumming rain and the frantic thud of her own heart. Then a new sound, heavy running footsteps, splashing through the puddles behind her. "Emily, you little rat, where do you think you're going?" Uncle Todd's voice, thick with fury, cracked through the storm symphony. Terror, cold and absolute, seized her. She scrambled, slipping on the treacherous mosaic of wet leaves and discarded trash, her drawing falling from her grasp. It uncurled with a pathetic sigh, the blazing house exposed to the merciless rain. No, the cry was torn from her. That drawing. It felt like the only piece of her true self left. Todd was on her in an instant. His heavy hand clamped down on her shoulder fingers, digging cruelly through the thin fabric of her coat. "Thought you could run, eh? Thought you could show that nosy teacher your stupid pictures?" His breath, sour with stale beer and rage, fanned her cheek. He'd seen her trying to slip it into her bag to show Mrs. Parker after school. He'd exploded. He yanked her upright, her feet scrabbling for purchase. The rain beat down, blinding her. "You're more trouble than you're worth, just like your good-for-nothing parents." As Todd began to drag her back towards the street, his other hand fumbling at his belt, the world seemed to tilt. The familiar dread of the belt, buckle a cold, metallic glint she knew too well, turned her blood to ice. She squeezed her eyes shut, a silent scream caught in her throat, bracing for the inevitable. A sleek, dark sedan, its presence an anomaly in this downtrodden neighborhood, had been inching along Maplewood Avenue, its driver peering through the rain-streaked windshield. Gregory Blake, CEO of Blake Industries and founder of a burgeoning philanthropic foundation, was thoroughly lost. His usually impeccable sense of direction had been defeated by the storm and the unfamiliar labyrinthine streets of this older district. He was en route to a community center, a potential beneficiary of his foundation's next grant. But his GPS had given up the ghost a few blocks back. He was about to make a U-turn when movement in the narrow alleyway between O'Malley's and the derelict laundromat snagged his attention. A man large and menacing dragging a small child. The glint of something metallic in the man's hand. The child's posture of utter terror. The scene punched the air from Gregory's lungs. It was a hideous, visceral echo from 30 years past, a dimly lit kitchen, the towering shadow of his stepfather. A belt raised his own small body, cowering his mother's stifled sobs in the next room. The raw, unhealed wound of his childhood, ripped open, exposing nerves still screaming from the trauma. Rachel, his sister. He'd been too young, too scared, too powerless to stop what happened to her. The guilt was a living thing, a cold serpent coiled around his heart. No, he whispered the word, a prayer, a vow. Not again. He slammed the sedan into park, not bothering to pull fully to the curb, and was out of the car in an instant, the torrential rain soaking his expensive Xenia overcoat within seconds. "Hey." Gregory's voice, deep and resonant, cut through the alley's claustrophobic din like a judgment. "Let her go. Now." Todd froze, whirling around his face, a mask of disbelief, and then incandescent rage at being interrupted. He still gripped Emily's arm, his knuckles white. The girl Emily stared at Gregory with wide, terrified eyes, her small face streaked with rain and tears. A crumpled, rain-soaked drawing of a burning house lay at her feet. "This ain't your concern, pal," Todd snarled, yanking Emily closer. She winced, a fresh stab of pain shooting up her arm. "She's my niece. My responsibility. Just a little family discipline." He gave the belt a small, threatening flick. Gregory took a measured step closer, his movements calm but radiating an intensity that made the air crackle. The rain plastered his dark hair to his forehead, but his gaze was unwavering, burning with a cold, controlled fury. Dragging a child through an alley, threatening her in this weather, that's not discipline. That's abuse. His eyes flicked to the drawing on the ground, and the flames rendered with a child's raw anguish. A familiar knot tightened in his own stomach. "She's a difficult kid, always causing trouble." Todd blustered, trying to regain control. "She needs a firm hand." "A firm hand, or a fist and a belt?" Gregory's voice dropped, laced with a dangerous quiet that made Todd unconsciously loosen his grip on Emily's arm. "I know your type. I grew up with your type." The admission was soft, almost lost in the rain, but it carried the weight of a lifetime. He reached into his inner coat pocket, not for a weapon, but for his phone. "Perhaps we should discuss your definition of firm hand with the Maplewood Police Department. I'm sure they'd be interested. And Child Protective Services too, while we're at it." Todd's face modeled a mixture of fury and a flicker of something else. Fear. He glanced around. A few pedestrians had stopped further down the street, drawn by the commotion, their faces indistinct blurs in the downpour, but their attention palpable. He was exposed. He abruptly released Emily's arm. She stumbled, catching herself against the wet brick wall, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Angry red welts were already blooming on her pale skin where his fingers had dug in. She fell. Todd growled, shoving his hands into his pockets, the belt now hidden. Clumsy brat, always falling. He shot a venomous look at Emily. "Get to the car, now." Then to Gregory, "Mind your own damn business, rich boy. Go back to your fancy life and leave honest folk alone." He grabbed Emily's other arm, less violently this time, but still rough and half-dragged, half-pushed her towards a rusted, faded red sedan parked precariously on the curb, its engine sputtering. He bundled her into the back seat, slammed the door with a resounding thud, and peeled away tires spitting gravel and muddy water narrowly missing Gregory's parked car. Gregory stood frozen for a moment, the rain running in rivulets down his face, his phone still in hand. He hadn't dialed. Not yet. But the image of the girl's terrified eyes, the brutal efficiency of the man's rage, the vibrant, horrifying drawing of the burning house. It all seared itself into his mind. He'd noted the license plate, JXR 305, and the man's face was etched in his memory. He stooped and carefully picked up the rain-soaked drawing. The colors were bleeding, but the image was still potent, a silent testament. This wasn't over. For that little girl, Emily, it felt like a nightmare without end. For Gregory Blake, it was the beginning of a promise he'd made to another child long ago in the shadows of his own past. A promise to never again stand by. The afternoon light, weak and gray, struggled to penetrate the grimy windows of room 2B at Hillside Elementary. The final bell had shrilled its dissonant call nearly half an hour ago, But Emily Green remained hunched at her small desk, her presence a silent reproach to the forced cheerfulness of the classroom's colorful posters. Her black crayon moved across a piece of paper, not with the fluid grace of creation, but with a tight, controlled pressure, as if she were trying to scratch through the surface of the paper into another world. Mrs. Sarah Parker watched her from her own desk, a familiar ache tightening her chest. Emily's sleeve, perpetually too long, had ridden up, revealing the angry yellowish-purple mottling of a bruise near her elbow. Newer, angrier than the one Sarah had painstakingly documented before. "Emily, sweetie." Mrs. Parker's voice was soft, a practiced gentleness honed by years of dealing with fragile young souls. "Did you manage to eat your lunch today?" A tiny, almost imperceptible shake of the head. Emily's gaze remained fixed on the chaotic drawing taking shape. Crooked, leaning walls, looming shadows that seemed to possess grasping claws, and in the very center, a small, stick-like figure trapped in a box, its eyes hollow staring. I couldn't," Emily mumbled, her voice barely audible. "Uncle Todd. He was mad this morning. Before school. Said I was too slow getting ready. He said if I made any noise at breakfast, or if I was too slow for anything, there'd be no food. Not for bad kids. He shook me." Sarah felt the familiar twist of anger and helplessness. She'd seen the bruises accumulate over weeks, then months. The sudden flinches if someone moved too quickly near Emily. The haunted quality of her eyes. The dark, repetitive themes in her artwork. She'd reported her concerns dutifully multiple times. Insufficient evidence for removal, the official response had always declared. Guardians Mr. and Mrs. Todd Miller expressed frustration with a difficult and clumsy child, prone to emotional outbursts and minor accidents. No direct signs of malicious abuse observed during cursory welfare check. The system, overburdened and under-resourced, needed undeniable, irrefutable proof. Not just a teacher's gut instinct, not just the silent scream embedded in a child's crayon strokes. One drawing from the previous week lay slightly apart on Sarah's desk, confiscated gently when Emily had tried to tear it up. A tall, shadowy figure arm raised a thick, belt-like object clutched in its hand. The crayon strokes were violent, desperate, tearing the cheap paper in one spot near the raised arm. When Sarah had gently asked, "Who is this, Emily? Can you tell me about this picture?" Emily had snatched it back, trembling. "It's nothing, it's just a bad dream. A monster." Today, though, something felt different, heavier. Emily seemed more withdrawn, the shadows under her eyes darker. As she reluctantly began to gather her things, her worn-patched backpack slipped from her lap, its contents spilling onto the scratched linoleum floor with a quiet cascade. Books, a few broken crayons, a half-eaten apple that Sarah knew Brenda Miller would punish her for not finishing. Amidst the detritus, a small folded photograph fluttered out. A smiling woman with kind eyes, and a man with a protective arm around her, a tiny, beaming Emily held securely between them. A moment of pure, unadulterated sunshine. But tucked behind it, almost as if used as a dark, reinforcing backing, was a different, starker image drawn on a piece of cheap newsprint, folded multiple times. A house rendered in furious, jagged black lines, dark and forbidding. One window was covered in angry red slashes. Inside, a vaguely female figure with Brenda Miller's lank blonde hair was depicted, her face turned away, back towards a smaller figure huddled in a corner, hands over its head. The small figure was unmistakably Emily. "Emily," Mrs. Parker said, her voice barely a whisper, as she picked up the drawing of the dark house. Her breath caught. This was new. This was specific. "Honey, what's this drawing about?" Emily's eyes, usually downcast, snapped up wide with sheer panic. "Nothing, it's nothing, Mrs. Parker, please." She lunged, snatching the drawing from Sarah's grasp, her small hands surprisingly strong. She shoved it deep into her bag, her movements frantic. I have to go. Uncle Todd gets really mad if I'm late. He times me. A small, almost invisible scar, a pale, thin line near her temple caught the light as she turned her head. She'd told Sarah she'd hit her head on her desk when she tripped. Her Uncle Todd had told the principal she'd fallen while climbing where she shouldn't in the backyard. The stories, as always, never quite matched. "You know you can trust me, Emily," Mrs. Parker said, her heart aching with a profound sense of failure. "I want to help you. We can talk about anything." "I can't," Emily whispered, tears welling in her eyes, making them look like dark drowning pools. "I can't talk. He'll know. He always knows." And with that, she fled her backpack. Bouncing against her thin shoulders, a tiny fugitive disappearing down the empty school hallway. From her classroom window, Mrs. Parker watched Emily hurry across the deserted schoolyard, a small, lonely figure against the vast expanse of gray asphalt. She saw the faded red sedan, rust bleeding down its sides like old weeping wounds, pull up aggressively to the curb. Saw Todd Miller get out, his posture reeking of impatience and barely suppressed aggression. Saw him grab Emily's arm when she fumbled with the car door handle, yanking her towards the car. Sarah's hand tightened into a fist, her knuckles white. Insufficient evidence. The words mocked her, echoed her own feelings of powerlessness. Earlier that day, Principal Hewitt had grudgingly informed her that a concerned citizen, a Mr. Gregory Blake, had come to the school. He'd apparently witnessed an incident involving Todd Miller and Emily that morning, describing it as deeply unsettling. Hewitt, ever cautious and more concerned with the school's reputation than its individual students' welfare, had been dismissive, citing privacy concerns, and Todd Miller's carefully constructed explanation of Emily being a bit of a handful. But Mr. Blake Hewitt had admitted with a touch of annoyance, had been persistent. He'd left his business card, a thick, expensive rectangle of ivory, asking to be contacted if there were any further concerns about Emily Green. Tonight, Sarah Parker decided she wouldn't just review Emily's growing file of sorrows. Tonight, she wouldn't just stare at the disturbing artwork and feel her stomach churn with dread. Tonight, she would call that man Gregory Blake. The name felt like a lifeline, a sliver of hope in a darkening world. Perhaps he could cut through the red tape that had so effectively strangled her own efforts. Perhaps his voice, evidently one of authority and influence, would be heard, where hers had been merely a whisper. Later that evening, Emily found herself the reluctant audience for a terrifying preemptive strike. She had accidentally left the drawing of Brenda and herself, the one with the red slashed window, peeking from her school bag when she got home. Todd had found it. His face had gone a frightening shade of purple. "What is this, you little snitch, drawing pictures of your auntie now? Telling tales at school?" Brenda had snatched it from him, her eyes wide with a different kind of fear. "Todd, calm down. It's just a kid's scribbles." "Scribbles that could land us in a world of hurt, you stupid woman," he'd roared. Now, hours later, the air in the Miller house was thick with a miasma of stale cigarette smoke and unspoken dread. Todd's heavy work boots thudded relentlessly on the worn vinyl floor of the kitchen as he paced like a caged animal. "That nosy teacher Parker, she's been sniffing around too much. And now this morning, some fancy-pants stranger sticks his nose in where it ain't wanted. They're pushing it, Brenda. They're pushing it too damn far." Brenda Miller perched precariously on a rickety kitchen chair, took a long drag from her cigarette, the orange tip glowing malevolently in the dim light. Ash like gray snow gathered on the chipped formica countertop. Her gaze flickered nervously towards the living room, where Emily sat small and utterly silent. Perched on the very edge of the sagging couch, her hands gripping the frayed woven bracelet her mother had made. "For strength, baby girl, and for love, always remember love." The words were a faint, precious echo, almost drowned out by the thunder of her fear. She better keep her damn mouth shut, Todd, Brenda said, her voice a low conspiratorial hiss. You know what happens if she starts talking. Not just about this. A jerky nod indicated the general squalor and simmering violence of their home. Her voice dropped further, barely audible. About everything. About the fire. About what really happened. Emily's fingers tightened on the bracelet. The fire. They always talked about the fire in whispers. The fire that had taken Mama and Papa. The fire, they said, was an accident, faulty wiring. But sometimes in her darkest dreams, the fire had Todd's face leering from the flames. Todd grabbed his belt from the hook by the back door. Not the buckle end this time, thankfully, but the thick, coiled leather strap. He didn't uncoil it. He just held it, weighing it in his hand as he stepped into the living room doorway, his bulk filling the frame, blocking out the meager light from the kitchen. "You been a good girl today, kid?" he asked, his voice deceptively soft, a chilling prelude she knew all too well. "You been quiet. You didn't go blabbing to anyone, did you?" Emily nodded, her eyes fixed on the scuffed toe of her worn sneaker. She couldn't meet his gaze. "Good." He let the coiled belt rest with a soft thud on the arm of the couch, a silent, potent threat, a coiled serpent ready to strike. Because if that busybody teacher calls social services again, or if that rich fop from this morning decides to make trouble, it'll be all your fault, Emily. You understand me? Your fault. And you know what happens then. "Yes, sir," she whispered, the words dry as dust catching in her throat. Below them, in the damp, oppressive chill of the illegally rented basement apartment, Mrs. Elena Alvarez, her hands chapped from endless cleaning jobs, crossed herself. "Santa María, Madre de Dios, ruega por nosotros pecadores." The thumps from the floor above had started earlier then, the shouting sharper and more vicious than usual. Now this heavy, loaded silence, punctuated by Todd's low, menacing rumble. She heard it all through the thin floorboards. The muffled arguments, the sudden silences that were somehow worse, sometimes the choked, heartbroken sobs that Emily tried so desperately to stifle. Todd had made the rules chillingly clear when she'd first rented the grim, windowless space. You hear anything, you see anything, you say nothing. You make any noise, you cause any trouble for us. ICE gets an anonymous call. Got a green card, old woman. Her status was precarious. Her beloved son Mateo, still in El Salvador, depended entirely on the pittance she managed to send him each month. Her silence was the terrible, crushing price of his survival, his chance at a future. But the price was becoming unbearable. She'd seen the bruises on the little Nina, the haunted look in her eyes. She'd slipped Emily small pieces of pan dulce or a piece of fruit when Todd and Brenda were out, or stupefied by drink or sleep. Emily's whispered "Gracias, Señora Alvarez," a tiny flower blooming in a wasteland, was a fresh knife to Elena's already bleeding soul. She had witnessed abuse before back in her village. A cousin, a spirited girl whose light had been extinguished by a brutal husband. Elena had been young, terrified, and had said nothing. The cousin had not survived. The guilt of that silence had shadowed Elena for decades. Now it felt as if God, or perhaps the devil, was testing her again. Gregory Blake sat in his home office, a room that epitomized sterile minimalist luxury. It was a world away from the grimy alley and the rain-soaked despair of Maplewood Avenue. But the image of Emily Green's terrified face, the raw anguish in her fallen drawing, refused to be banished. He'd driven by the school Hillside Elementary and had a frustratingly opaque conversation with a Principal Hewitt, who seemed more interested in bureaucratic deflection than child welfare. Afterwards, Gregory had located the Miller address from a quick online search linked to the license plate. A dilapidated two-story house on Sycamore Street just off Maplewood that radiated neglect and silent misery even from the curb. The file his private investigator, a discreet and highly efficient man named David Chen, had compiled lay open on his mahogany desk. Green, Emily. Age 6. Parental status deceased. Father Michael Green. Mother Anna Green, née Kowalski. Cause of death, accidental residential fire. Guardians maternal aunt and husband, Brenda Miller and Todd Miller. Initial emergency placement approved by family court judge following tragedy. No follow-up welfare visits noted in the sparse social services record Chen had managed to access. His own childhood unspooled in his mind, a silent black and white horror film. His stepfather Arthur, a man whose charm concealed a volatile, sadistic temper. The unpredictable rages, the sting of the belt, the shattering of porcelain. His mother's vacant, broken silences, too terrified or too defeated to protect him or his younger sister Rachel. He'd survived escaping into academic excellence, and then into the relentless drive of building his business empire. He'd built walls of wealth and success around himself, but the ghosts of his past still found the cracks. Rachel. Sweet, fragile Rachel. She hadn't been so lucky. Different circumstances, perhaps, but the same soul-crushing neglect, the same casual cruelty. Arthur hadn't laid a hand on her as often as he had on Gregory, but his emotional abuse and disdain had been relentless. When Rachel had developed a persistent cough, a low fever, Arthur had dismissed it as attention-seeking. His mother, cowed and medicated, had dithered. Gregory, barely a teenager himself and consumed by his own survival, hadn't pushed hard enough, hadn't screamed loud enough. By the time Rachel was finally taken to a doctor, the pneumonia was too advanced. She'd slipped away in a sterile hospital room, a small, quiet fading of a light that should have burned brightly for decades. He'd been too young, too powerless, too consumed by his own pain then. Not anymore. He had the resources, the influence, the sheer, unadulterated will. This time he wouldn't fail another child. His private line, the one reserved for urgent matters, trilled. He glanced at the caller ID. Unknown number. He almost let it go to voicemail. Blake. A woman's voice, strained but resolute, came down the line. Mr. Blake, my name is Sarah Parker. I'm Emily Green's second-grade teacher at Hillside Elementary. Principal Hewitt. He mentioned you came by today. I think we need to talk. Urgently. Gregory sat upright. Mrs. Parker. Yes, I'm glad you called. Their conversation was a grim, chilling confluence of observations. Mrs. Parker detailed her growing file of meticulously dated notes, unexplained bruises appearing after weekends or holidays, Emily's reluctance to participate in gym class, her hoarding of food scraps, her escalating fear of making mistakes, and the increasingly disturbing and violent themes in her drawings. She described the drawing Emily had snatched back, the one with the figure and the raised belt. She recounted the encounter after school, Emily's panic, and her whispered, "I can't talk. He'll know." Gregory, in turn, recounted the horrific scene in the alleyway, Todd Miller's raw aggression, Emily's abject terror, and the discarded drawing of the burning house. He emailed her a clear photograph of Miller's license plate he'd taken before picking up the drawing. I've reported my concerns to Child Protective Services multiple times, Mrs. Parker said, her voice heavy with frustration and weariness. They conducted one perfunctory welfare check months ago. The Millers presented as concerned guardians, if a little rough around the edges. Todd Miller told them Emily was a handful clumsy and prone to dramatic tantrums and accidental injuries. Brenda Miller backed him up. They apparently interviewed Emily in the presence of her aunt and uncle. Of course, she said everything was fine. They closed the case. Insufficient evidence for intervention. They won't this time, Gregory stated, a cold, hard fury solidifying his resolve. He made a mistake today, Mrs. Parker. A big one. He assaulted her in public, and I am an eyewitness with no prior connection to the family. I have his license plate, a photograph of it, and a very good memory for faces and details. My legal team will be contacting CPS first thing in the morning with a formal sworn affidavit. We will demand they reopen the case immediately." He paused the image of the burning house, drawing swimming before his eyes. "Mrs. Parker, you said her parents, Michael and Anna Green, died in a fire. Was there anything unusual about the circumstances? Anything that struck you as odd at the time?" Sarah Parker hesitated. It was officially ruled accidental. "Faulty wiring in an old house," I believe the report said. The fire department's findings were conclusive, or so everyone was told. Brenda and Todd Miller were awarded custody fairly quickly. Brenda was Anna's only sibling listed as next of kin. It all seemed straightforward, a tragic accident. She paused, then continued, her voice troubled. "But Emily sometimes draws fire. Not just the drawing you found today. Often she draws these angry, swirling red and orange infernos, sometimes with small stick figures trapped inside them. They're different from her other dark drawings, more visceral, more terrifyingly vivid. When I try to ask her about them, she clams up or says it's just a monster from a bad dream." An uneasy, chilling premonition settled over Gregory. Faulty wiring, or something far more sinister hidden beneath layers of tragedy and official reports. What if the roots of Emily's current torment went deeper into the very event that had delivered her into the Millers' destructive care? "Thank you for your courage in calling me Mrs. Parker," Gregory said. "You're not alone in this anymore." The very next morning, after a night where Emily had woken screaming from a nightmare about grasping shadows and the smell of smoke, Todd Miller found a hand-delivered letter on his porch. It was not from CPS, not yet. It was a terse, legally phrased communication from a high-powered law firm, Hawthorne Stone and Associates, notifying him that their client, Mr. Gregory Blake, had witnessed an assault on a minor, Emily Green, by Mr. Todd Miller, and had filed a formal police report and a complaint with Child Protective Services. It mentioned that Mr. Blake would be pursuing all available legal avenues to ensure the child's safety. Todd crumpled the letter, his face contorting. "Rich bastard," he spat. Brenda, seeing the official-looking envelope, had gone pale. The subclimax arrived with brutal swiftness 2 days later. Emily, driven by a desperate, almost unconscious need to unburden herself, had been drawing at the kitchen table while Todd was out on a supposed job interview and Brenda was chain-smoking on the porch. She wasn't drawing shadows this time. She was drawing the fire again, but with a new detail, a figure tall and bulky like Uncle Todd, holding something that looked like a gas can near the basement stairs in the drawing of her old house just before the red and orange flames erupted. She was so absorbed, she didn't hear Todd return his interview, having clearly gone badly. He loomed over her, his shadow falling across her paper. "What in the hell is that?" He whispered, his voice a deadly hiss. Emily jumped, a small cry escaping her. She tried to cover the drawing, but he was too fast. He snatched it. His eyes scanned the crude images, the gas can, the flames originating from the basement. For a moment he froze his face, turning an awful pasty white. Then a terrifying guttural roar ripped from his throat. "You little witch! What are you trying to do to me?" He grabbed her not by the arm, but by her hair, yanking her head back. Pain, sharp and blinding, exploded through her scalp. Emily screamed a high, piercing sound of pure terror. "You think you can send me to jail with your filthy lies, your crazy drawings?" He shook her violently, her teeth clacking together. In the basement, Mrs. Alvarez heard the scream, then the sickening thud as Emily's small body was slammed against what sounded like the refrigerator. The torrent of curses, Todd's voice raw with a panic she'd never heard before. This was different. This wasn't his usual bullying. This was primal fear mixed with murderous rage. No mas, she thought, her heart pounding against her ribs. No more silence. Her own past, her own failure to protect her cousin, rose up like a specter. She remembered her cousin's bruised face, her extinguished spirit. The fear of deportation, the fear of Todd's retaliation, suddenly seemed insignificant next to the vision of Emily being destroyed. Todd was dragging Emily towards the basement door. "I'll teach you to draw things you shouldn't. I'll lock you in the dark until you forget every damn thing." Mrs. Alvarez didn't even think. She scrambled up the rickety basement stairs, adrenaline giving her a strength she didn't know she possessed, and burst into the kitchen just as Todd was fumbling with the bolt on the basement door, Emily limp and sobbing in his grasp. "Déjà en paz, animal, Mrs." Alvarez shrieked, grabbing a cast-iron skillet from the stove. It was heavy, but her outrage was heavier. "You touch that child again, I swear to God, I will split your head open." Todd whirled, momentarily stunned by her ferocity. His eyes were wide, bloodshot. Emily seized the moment, wriggling free and scrambling behind Mrs. Alvarez's surprisingly sturdy legs. "You stay out of this, old woman," Todd snarled, taking a step towards them. "No, this ends now." Mrs. Alvarez stood her ground, the skillet held high. Her phone, an old burner model, was in her apron pocket. Her fingers, clumsy with fear and haste, fumbled for it. She had Mrs. Parker's number scribbled on a piece of paper Emily had dropped once hidden inside her prayer book. If she called the police, Todd might escape consequences or twist the story. But the teacher cared. Just then, Brenda stumbled in from the porch, drawn by the commotion. "Todd, what are you doing? Are you crazy?" Todd's face was a mask of fury. She knows the little brat. She's drawing pictures of the fire. She's trying to tell them. Brenda's eyes darted from Todd to Emily, then to the drawing still clutched in Todd's hand. Her face crumpled. "Oh God, Todd." Before Todd could react further, Mrs. Alvarez, shielding Emily, managed to dial. Her English was broken, her voice trembling, but when Mrs. Parker answered, her message was starkly, chillingly clear. "Senora Parker, ayúdame, Mr. Todd. He attack Emily pictures of fire. He lock her in dark, very bad. Pronto, por favor, pronto." She didn't know Gregory Blake's number, but Mrs. Parker would. The call from a distraught Sarah Parker galvanized Gregory. He was already on high alert, his lawyers in constant contact with a slowly mobilizing CPS. Miss Albright, the newly assigned social worker, was young, but seemed more diligent than her predecessors, perhaps, because of the legal pressure Gregory's firm was exerting. She had scheduled an unannounced visit for the next day. But Mrs. Alvarez's panicked call signaled that next day might be too late. Gregory contacted Ms. Albright, immediately relaying the terrifying new information from Mrs. Alvarez via Mrs. Parker. He also dispatched David Chen, his investigator, to Sycamore Street to discreetly observe the Miller house. He himself headed straight for Hillside Elementary. He had a gut feeling Todd Miller, cornered and exposed, might try something desperate. School dismissal was often chaotic, a perfect opportunity. The news that an emergency hearing was being expedited by CPS, potentially to remove Emily from their custody that very day, based on new witness testimony from a resident at the same address, sent Todd Miller into a complete tailspin. Brenda had found out through a frantic hushed call from a reluctant contact at social services, who owed her a long-forgotten favor. She'd confronted Todd, her voice shaking. "They know, Todd. Someone in the house talked. They're coming for Emily." "Mrs. Alvarez." Todd spat, his face ashen. "That meddling old crow. I'll kill her. But first, Emily. She was the key. If she wasn't there to testify, if she recanted under duress, if she was simply gone, A desperate, insane plan began to form in his mind. He had to get Emily away, make her disappear until this blew over or permanently. He waited a predator concealed in the overgrown thorny bushes that lined the edge of the hillside elementary schoolyard. The bell had just rung, and children were beginning to spill out. He knew Emily often stayed a little late, either with Mrs. Parker or in the art room with Miss Carter, the young, vibrant art teacher who had taken a special interest in Emily's expressive, if often dark, drawings. Today, Emily emerged from the side door, leading from the art wing, chatting with Miss Carter. Another little girl, Grace, a classmate with bright pigtails and a gap-toothed smile, was with them, the two girls giggling over a shared drawing of a purple unicorn with rainbow wings. Grace was a new tentative friend, one of the few children who hadn't been put off by Emily's quietness. Miss Carter paused to lock the art room door. Grace, eager to show her mother the unicorn, skipped ahead towards the main gate. For a fleeting moment, Emily stood alone near the edge of the schoolyard, her small hand clutching her backpack strap. This was Todd's chance. It was now or never. He burst from the bushes, a desperate, feral gleam in his eyes. "Emily, you're coming with me now." Before Emily could even register his presence, he grabbed her. Not by the arm this time. His left hand clamped hard over her mouth, stifling her instinctive scream, while his right arm snaked around her waist like a steel band, lifting her off her feet. Emily's scream was a muffled, terrified vibration against his rough palm. Her backpack, filled with her precious drawings and a tattered copy of Charlotte's Web Mrs. Parker had lent her, tumbled to the asphalt with a soft thud. Grace, hearing the scuffle and Emily's stifled cry, whirled around. Her eyes widened in horror. "Emily, no, let her go, you bad man!" She shrieked, her small voice piercing the afternoon air. Miss Carter spun around, her face blanching. "Mr. Miller, what do you think you're doing? Put her down immediately." She started towards them, her phone already in her hand, dialing 911. "She's my niece. I'm taking her home." Todd snarled, his eyes wild. He began to drag the struggling, kicking Emily towards his battered red sedan, which he'd parked haphazardly half a block down, engine idling. He fumbled in his pocket with his free hand, pulling out a small, wickedly sharp pocket knife. He didn't open the blade fully, but he let the metallic gleam catch the light, a clear, unspoken threat to anyone who tried to intervene. But Gregory Blake, forewarned by Mrs. Parker's frantic call, relaying Mrs. Alvarez's terror, and driven by his own deep, gnawing unease that had led him to Hillside minutes before dismissal, had parked unobtrusively across the street. He'd been scanning the area, his senses on high alert. The moment Todd erupted from the bushes, Gregory was out of his car, his long legs eating up the distance with surprising speed. He saw the glint of the knife. His blood ran cold. Not this time. Miller Gregory's voice was a resonant crack of thunder cutting through Todd's desperate tirade. He reached them just as Todd managed to yank open the rear door of his sedan, trying to shove the fiercely resisting Emily inside. Gregory didn't hesitate. He launched himself at Todd, not with blind rage, but with a cold, precise fury honed by years of repressed anger and a desperate need for redemption. His hand shot out not for the knife, but for Todd's wrist, the one gripping Emily. Gregory's fingers, strong from years of rowing and a disciplined workout regimen, clamped down like a vice. He twisted using leverage and a burst of adrenaline-fueled strength. Todd roared in pain and surprise, his grip on Emily faltering. The pocket knife clattered to the pavement. Emily stumbled free, gasping for breath, and was immediately swept into Miss Carter's protective embrace. Grace, brave despite her fear, ran to retrieve Emily's fallen backpack. Todd, incensed and humiliated, his arm, throbbing, swung wildly at Gregory with his free hand. Gregory sidestepped the clumsy blow, his eyes blazing with a chilling, righteous intensity. "You think you can prey on the weak, on a child?" he snarled, grabbing Todd by the front of his greasy shirt, slamming him hard against the side of the rusted sedan. The metal groaned in protest. You think fear is a tool you can wield forever. I know monsters like you, Miller. I grew up in the shadow of one. And I learned one thing: they all end up the same way. Pathetic, exposed, and utterly alone when their power is stripped away. The raw, undeniable pain of his own past, the ghost of Rachel's small, frightened face, was stark in his voice, lending it a terrifying conviction. Sirens wailing closer now, sliced through the afternoon air. Mrs. Parker, having received Mrs. Alvarez's call and then witnessing Todd's car speeding towards the school, had also alerted 911 with the chilling certainty of what was about to unfold. As two police cruisers screeched to a halt, lights flashing, Brenda Miller, who had been circling the block in a panic after Todd stormed out of the house, muttering about fixing things permanently, arrived. She slammed on the brakes of her own dilapidated car, her face a mask of dread. Seeing Todd pinned against his car by this tall, imposing stranger, Emily safe, but clearly terrified in Miss Carter's arms, and police officers advancing something in Brenda, some long-corroded dam of denial and complicity, finally shattered. Not in a violent outburst, but in a torrent of long-suppressed, agonizing truth. It wasn't just the wiring, she suddenly screamed, her voice ragged, hysterical, tears streaming down her grimy face as a startled officer approached her. She pointed a trembling finger at Todd. The fire that killed Anna and Michael. Todd. He was supposed to get the house rewired months before. The landlord gave him the money, cash, a lot of it. He gambled it all away, every cent. She clutched her stomach, heaving as if a physical poison was being expelled. He kept saying the wiring would hold, that it wasn't that bad, that he'd fix it next week, next month. But then Michael, Emily's dad, he found out about the money. He was going to call the landlord, call the city inspectors. They had a terrible argument the night before the fire. Shouting, things breaking. Her voice trailed off, her eyes wide with a horrifying, dawning comprehension of what Todd's negligence, his desperate cover-up, might have truly wrought. What he might have actively done to prevent exposure. He didn't mean for them to die. Did he? She sobbed, looking wildly from Todd's stunned, furious face to the impassive face of the officer. He just didn't want to get caught about the money. He said maybe a small fire in the basement where the old wiring was. Enough to scare Michael, to make it look like an accident before Michael could report him. Oh God, what did he do? What did we do by staying silent? This was the horrifying twist. The fire that had orphaned Emily, the event that had plunged her into this nightmare, wasn't merely a tragic accident compounded by Todd's later abuse. It was the direct, foreseeable result of Todd Miller's criminal negligence, his theft, and quite possibly a deliberately set blaze intended to destroy evidence and intimidate his brother-in-law, a desperate act that had spiraled catastrophically out of control. Brenda, through her fear and her misguided loyalty, had been his silent, terrified accomplice in concealing this monumental, deadly secret for years. Gregory watched his chest tight with a mixture of cold satisfaction and profound sorrow. As Todd Miller, his face a mask of disbelief, sputtering denials, was cuffed and read his rights. The fight seemed to drain out of him, replaced by a dawning, vacant horror. Gregory went to Emily, who was trembling uncontrollably in Miss Carter's embrace, her small face buried in her teacher's shoulder. Mrs. Parker had arrived and was now stroking Emily's hair, her own face wet with tears. Gregory knelt, bringing himself to Emily's eye level. His expensive suit was mud-stained and torn at the knee from the scuffle his knuckles scraped, but he didn't care. "It's over, Emily," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "You're safe now. He can't hurt you anymore." Emily slowly lifted her head. Her eyes, huge and dark in her pale face, were filled with a maelstrom of terror, confusion, and a tiny flickering ember of something else. Hope. She looked at Gregory, this stranger, who had twice appeared like a guardian angel. Then, with a choked sob, She launched herself from Miss Carter's arms into his, clinging to him, with a strength that belied her small, frail frame. Her sobs were no longer silent, suffocated things. They were raw, heartbroken, wrenching cries, the outpouring of years of accumulated fear and grief. But in Gregory's steady, unwavering hold, cocooned by the presence of her teacher and the art teacher who believed in her, there was a glimmer of a future she hadn't dared to imagine. A future where the shadows might begin to recede. He held her tightly, one hand, cradling the back of her head, the other protectively around her small, shaking shoulders. He thought of Rachel, of the embrace he'd never been strong enough or brave enough to offer her when she'd needed it most. A single tear traced a path through the grime on his own cheek. This time, Rachel, he thought. This time I didn't stand by. The courtroom was cold, an imposing chamber of dark wood and hushed solemnity that seemed to drain the very warmth from the air. Emily sat nestled between Gregory and Mrs. Parker, her small hand clutching Gregory's the other, tracing the familiar, comforting threads of her mother's woven bracelet. She wore a new dress, a soft blue, chosen by Eleanor, Gregory's kind, no-nonsense housekeeper, who had clucked over Emily like a mother hen since her arrival at Gregory's home under emergency foster placement. Todd Miller, dressed in an ill-fitting county-issue jumpsuit, his face sullen and unshaven, avoided everyone's gaze, staring mutinously at the defense table. Brenda, pale and visibly fragile, sat separately with her public defender. She had agreed to testify against Todd in exchange for a plea bargain. Brenda was the first to take the stand. Her voice, barely audible at first, gained a desperate strength as she recounted Todd's confession to her about the gambling debts. How he'd taken the landlord's money meant for rewiring Emily's parents' home. The escalating arguments with Michael Green, who had discovered the theft and threatened to expose him. She tearfully described Todd's frantic, panicked idea to start a small, controllable fire in the basement to destroy the old wiring and make it look like an accident, thus covering his theft and silencing Michael, at least temporarily. She recounted how he'd claimed it, got out of hand. She then detailed the subsequent years of fear, his escalating abuse of Emily, his threats that had kept her silent about both the fire's true origin and the violence within their home. I was a coward, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. I was so afraid of him, of what he'd do to me, to Emily. I let it happen. I let it all happen. Mrs. Alvarez, accompanied by a translator, was next. She had been granted a temporary visa and protection as a material witness thanks to the swift intervention of Gregory's legal team, who were also working on a more permanent humanitarian solution for her. Her quiet dignity filled the courtroom as she recounted in a voice trembling with remembered fear, but resolute with newfound courage, the chilling sounds from the floor above her grim apartment, the thuds, the whimpers, Emily's stifled cries, Todd's rages. For a long time I prayed, she said, her dark eyes rimmed with tears, finding Emily's for a moment. But my fear, it made me a prisoner too, until I could not bear the child's silent suffering any longer. No child should live in such fear. I failed another child long ago in my village by staying silent. I could not fail again. The weight of her past regret lent her words an undeniable gravitas. Gregory's testimony was concise, factual, and powerful. He calmly described the alleyway assault and the attempted abduction at the school, his voice never wavering. When the prosecutor gently prompted him about his motivations for getting so involved, Gregory paused. He looked towards Emily, a fleeting expression of profound sadness in his eyes. I believe, he said, his voice dropping slightly, resonating with an intensity that silenced the courtroom, that we all have a duty to protect children. Some of us understand the lifelong shadows that abuse can cast more intimately than others. He didn't elaborate on his own past, but the carefully chosen words and the depth of emotion in his voice alluded to a pain that lent an unimpeachable weight to his commitment. Children like Emily Green. He concluded, his gaze sweeping to the judge. Need more than just shelter and food. They need champions. They need to be seen, to be heard, and above all, to be believed. Then it was Emily's turn. Miss Albright, the social worker, who had become a quiet advocate for Emily, walked with her to the witness stand, offering a reassuring smile. Emily looked impossibly small, dwarfed by the imposing judge's bench and the solemnity of the court. She didn't look at Todd or Brenda. Her gaze was fixed on a small beaded lizard keychain Grace had given her for luck, which she clutched in her free hand. Emily, the prosecutor began gently, can you tell the judge in your own words what it was like living with your aunt and uncle? She took a deep breath, her small shoulders squared. They made the shadows big. She whispered into the microphone, her voice trembling but surprisingly clear in the hushed room. My house, with my mom and dad. They made the light. Mama used to sing. Papa used to read me stories in a funny voice. A tiny, fleeting smile touched her lips, then vanished. I miss the light. She finally lifted her gaze to the judge, a woman with kind eyes, not unlike Mrs. Parker's. I want to live where the light is now, please. I don't want the bad dreams anymore. The verdict, when it came days later after jury deliberation, was swift and unequivocal. Todd Miller was found guilty of multiple counts of child endangerment, unlawful corporal punishment, aggravated assault, and crucially 2 counts of involuntary manslaughter due to gross criminal negligence directly leading to the deaths of Michael and Anna Green. His sentence was significant, 25 years to life. He received it with a stunned, blank expression. Brenda Miller, for her role in obstruction of justice and felony child neglect, received a lesser sentence involving several years in a state correctional facility to be followed by intensive mandatory rehabilitation programs and long-term probation. Her own journey towards accountability, towards comprehending the true cost of her silence and complicity, was just beginning. Emily would remain in Gregory Blake's temporary emergency custody, with permanent adoption proceedings initiated and expedited by a visibly moved Judge Davies. Outside the courthouse, the crisp autumn wind felt different. Cleansing, almost hopeful. It whipped Emily's hair across her face, but she didn't seem to mind. She didn't speak, but she slipped her small hand into Gregory's, her grip surprisingly firm, anchoring him as much as he anchored her. Mrs. Parker stood on her other side, a gentle hand resting on her shoulder. You were so brave in there, sweetheart, Mrs. Parker said softly, her eyes shining. So incredibly brave. Emily looked up at Gregory, a serious, considering look in her eyes, and then at Mrs. Parker. A tiny, hesitant smile, the first genuine smile Gregory had seen from her, that wasn't tinged with fear or sadness, touched her lips. It was like the first crocus of spring pushing through frozen earth. Mr. Blake, she asked, her voice still small but with a new lightness. Can we maybe get a new drawing pad, the really big kind with all the colors? Gregory's heart swelled, a sudden unexpected tide of emotion threatening to overwhelm him. He knelt beside her. Emily, he said, his voice a little unsteady. We can get all the drawing pads in the entire city if you want. Her smile widened just a fraction. Just one big one will be okay. For now. Months later, spring painted Maplewood Avenue and its surrounding streets in hesitant, hopeful pastels. Daffodils and tulips peeked from thawing gardens, their bright colors a cheerful defiance against the lingering memory of winter. Gregory Blake's house, once a sanctuary of quiet, almost monastic solitude, now often echoed with the light patter of small feet, the occasional surprisingly infectious giggle. The soft, rhythmic scratch of crayons and colored pencils on paper, and the surprisingly upbeat jazzy tunes Eleanor, his housekeeper, insisted on playing while she baked. Usually Emily's favorite chocolate chip cookies. Emily turned 7. The sprawling backyard, once meticulously manicured and seldom used, was filled with the joyful chaos of a small, carefully curated birthday party. Grace, Emily's best friend from Hillside, was there, her laughter bubbling as they chased butterflies near Eleanor's burgeoning rose bushes. Miss Carter, the art teacher, had brought a huge portfolio of specialty papers and a brand new set of professional watercolors for Emily. Mrs. Parker beamed from a garden chair, chatting warmly with Eleanor, who was presiding over a table laden with cake and lemonade like a benevolent queen. And in a comfortable wicker chair shaded by a blossoming dogwood tree sat Mrs. Alvarez. Thanks to Gregory's legal team and a compelling humanitarian plea detailing her bravery and the dangers she might face if deported, she had been granted asylum. She wore a brightly colored shawl, a gift from Eleanor, and a serene, contented smile played on her lips as she watched Emily, her dark eyes full of a gentle, healing warmth. Emily had shyly presented her with a small framed drawing, earlier 2 smiling figures, one old, one young, holding hands under a radiant sun. Tucked into the corner was a tiny, somewhat wobbly depiction of a skillet. Mrs. Alvarez had hugged her tightly, whispering, "Eres mi angelita valiente, my brave little angel." Gregory presented Emily with his own gift, wrapped in shimmering silver paper. It was a professionally framed canvas. On it was one of Emily's earlier drawings from her first few weeks with him, a simple green door, much like the one to her new bedroom, with bright yellow light streaming from its window and a tall, dark-haired figure holding a small girl's hand, walking towards it. Beneath the drawing, in small, neat gold lettering, a little plaque read, "E. Green, age 6. Where the light begins." "We'll hang it in the front hallway," Gregory said, his voice thick with pride and an emotion he was slowly learning to identify as pure, uncomplicated happiness. "Where everyone who comes into our home can see your beautiful work." Emily gazed at the framed painting, her eyes luminous. Then she looked at the faces around her. Grace giggling as she tried to teach Eleanor a complicated clapping game. Miss Carter showing Mrs. Parker some new art techniques. Mrs. Alvarez, her eyes alight with a peaceful joy. She thought of her parents, a familiar pang of sadness deep and enduring, but now mingled with a newer, warmer feeling like spring sunshine after a long winter. The shadows weren't gone completely. She knew some would likely linger softly at the edges of her memory for a long time, but they didn't have sharp teeth and cold claws anymore. They were just shadows, and the light all around her was so much stronger. She reached for the new drawing pad Miss Carter had given her, its pages thick and inviting. "What are you going to draw first?" Grace asked, abandoning the clapping game and bouncing over. Emily looked out at the expansive garden, at the sunlight, dappling through the fresh, vibrant green leaves of the ancient oak tree that dominated one corner of the yard. She thought of the dark, crooked houses she used to draw, the ones with no windows, or windows barred with angry slashes. Maybe a house, she said, her voice soft but sure, a new confidence blossoming within her. A big house, with lots and lots of windows, all of them wide open. She still wore her mother's woven bracelet, its threads a testament to love and loss and survival. One thread had frayed recently, but she didn't try to fix it or hide it. It was okay, she was learning for some things to show their history, their scars. And nestled beside it on her small wrist was a new brightly beaded friendship bracelet Grace had painstakingly made for her. Later that evening, when the last guest had departed and a contented quiet settled over the house, Emily sat with Gregory on the wide porch swing, a half-eaten slice of birthday cake in her hand, her feet not quite reaching the wooden slats of the porch. Eleanor's voice, humming softly along to a classic Ella Fitzgerald song on the radio, drifted from the open kitchen window, a comforting domestic melody. "Happy birthday," M. Gregory said softly, his arm resting lightly around her small shoulders. The warmth of her small body leaning against his side was a sensation he was coming to cherish more than any business deal or acquisition. Emily leaned her head against his shoulder, a comfortable, trusting weight. She still missed her parents with an ache that she knew would likely never fully disappear. She still sometimes woke in the night from dreams of fire and falling of shadows, with cold hands and angry voices. But now when she woke, the whimsical narwhal-shaped nightlight Gregory had insisted on buying for her cast a steady, gentle glow across her room, and she knew with a certainty that settled deep in her bones that she wasn't alone. She knew that if she called out, Gregory would be there in an instant. "Thank you, Gregory," she whispered, her voice sleepy. "It wasn't just for the party or the presents or the big house with all the windows. Thank you for seeing me, even when I was hiding in the dark." Gregory held her a little tighter, his throat constricting. His own journey from a boy shattered by abuse and loss to a man walled off by success and old pain, to this, a father, a protector, a healer, felt both improbable and profoundly right. He remembered Rachel's face, not as a ghost of guilt, but as a soft, encouraging presence, finally at peace. "Always Emily," he murmured, pressing a light kiss to the top of her hair, which smelled faintly of sunshine and birthday cake. Always. The gentle evening breeze stirred, carrying the sweet scent of newly cut grass and Eleanor's blooming night jasmine. For Emily Green, the world was slowly, carefully, painstakingly repainting itself in brighter, more hopeful colors. The light indeed was beginning, and this time she knew it was here to stay.